Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Rausan, Pereira. India and Japan finalized a crucial agreement on cybersecurity to boost cooperation in the fields of 5G, artificial intelligence and critical information infrastructure. During External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar's visit to Tokyo, the two countries also pledged to work together for a free and open Indo-Pacific with diversified supply chains. The proposed cybersecurity agreement will promote initiatives in capacity building, research and development. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the tech ties between India and Japan. Joining me on the program today are Vishnu Prakash, former ambassador, Rahul Chaudhry, Chair, Homeland Security, FICCI, and Pant, Head, Strategic Studies, Observer Research Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you first. Let's talk about the takeaways really as far as the External Affairs Minister's visit to Japan is concerned. And more importantly, let's focus right now on the ties between India and Japan first before we broaden the scope and talk about everything else that happened in Tokyo.
The External Affairs Minister had a very good visit to Japan. The Japanese side is attaching a lot of significance to the event that was hosted for the Quad ministers. In fact, it was the first in-person meeting which was held during the COVID era, and the first meeting under the premiership of Prime Minister Suga. Now, for us, the relationship with Japan is very significant. It's a global and strategic partnership. It's a tech giant. And our technology cooperation, our manufacturing cooperation, industrial cooperation is one of the key foundations or key salient aspects of the relationship. The cybersecurity cooperation assumes great significance in the present day, given the fact that Japan and India have been our targets of cyber intrusions, cyber warfare, cyber attacks from many countries. Some we know, some we do not. And this is going to be a bigger challenge with the passage of time, because tomorrow's contestation will be based on cyber intrusions and cyber warfare. And we are in a certain neighborhood that both India and Japan, that our security situation is complicated. We know that there are a certain country which is leading in terms of the cyber warfare, and it is very necessary for all countries, especially countries like Japan, India, and democratic countries, to join hands to increase intelligence, to experience share, to enhance the training programs, so that we can deal with this crisis, because it can affect any and everything: business, commerce, government, aviation, and what have you.
Absolutely. All right. So, Rahul Chaudhry, let me bring you to the picture now. As far as cyber warfare and cyber intrusions are concerned, how susceptible is India really, and how can Japan help us in, tackling this front and ensuring that we strengthen our cyber security?
Look, India is one of the most vulnerable nations on on the cyber front, because we do not have a offensive capability at all. We have never created that kind of a capability in this country. We have a passive defense kind of capability, but our kind of capabilities and in cyber and ITES is ultimately what the cyber domain comes to. If you go back and remember Mr. Chaudhry, who in 2010 created the big leak and all of that, 2009 he was in this very country doing a course on cyber hacking. So it's not that India lacked the capabilities. It's unfortunately the political will which was never there, and we never created the kind of capabilities which we could. The second point I would like to just add in the context of Japan and in this whole larger context of what is happening with China, where this entire Quads is coming into. Please remember that this concept was brought to us by Mr. Abe in 2007. And 2007 was the time when China started to create its Great Wall of keeping the world's internet out. And 2010, they had created that. So if the Berlin Wall was the wall which which defined the Cold War, this cyber situation and cyber war on which China is the most potent capability, enemy, frenemy, whatever you may call it, is protected behind that wall. That is the significance of this. And Japan, us coming together is something where it can't be just Japan and us coming together. It is the Quads which has to come together. It has the Americans which need to be coming together. And this is a very potent and a very important alliance which we need to create. The last point I would like to make is critical information infrastructure. I mean, that is the crux of the matter, and that is where we need to protect the entire world.
Okay. We'll go a little more in detail into that particular aspect of critical information infrastructure and how do we protect it, how do we build it, what more needs to be done. I'll come back to you, Rahul Chaudhry, in just a bit. But, talking about the Quad, Ambassador, I'd like to get a reaction in from you. Mr. Chaudhry, they're suggesting that, cooperation on just the Japan and India front is not enough. More like-minded nations need to come together if we have to be fully cyber ready.
Oh, absolutely. This is a global challenge, and it is literally the democratic open societies versus the closed societies or authoritarian states in one way. Although the fact remains that when it comes to spying, every country, I'm making a general statement, you spy on friends and foes. So that's a different matter.
Absolutely.
But the kind of cyber intrusions and hacking and attacks that certain countries or country engages in can only be contained. Will not say can be neutralized, but can be contained if major countries and especially Quad countries and the others come together. Because there have to be two aspects, and I agree with Mr. Chaudhry. There has to be defensive aspects to it, so that you have enough firewalls, you take precautions, and you have also to have the ability of taking the fight back or give a taste of the medicine to the country or countries from where such malpractices originate. So, and that is the whole idea, because it cannot, the idea is to bring on board other like-minded countries, and it's only with exchanging of experiences, best practices, and so on, that this challenge, a huge challenge, can be dealt with, can be handled.
Okay, all right. So, Harshvi Pant, since we're talking about the Quad, let's look at the Quad as a whole and cyber security too. How serious is an issue of cyber security as far as the Quad is concerned? How serious is the Quad to address this particular issue, and do you see that happening?
I think what has happened with the Quad is that we are looking at now an evolution in terms of the agenda that Quad is looking at, and cybersecurity is one of the issues that is increasingly at the top of that agenda. So I think it's good news in terms of Quad's own ability to codify certain norms. Whether it can come together in more substantive ways remains to be seen. But clearly the four nations, US, Japan, Australia, and India, today are convergent on the larger threat perception that is emanating around the cyber domain. And there, when you look at both India and Japan, when you look at Australia, when you look at America, all of these countries have been targets of cyber warfare, cyber operations, which have been detrimental to the larger sort of political environment, larger socio-economic environment. There have been not only stealing of technology involved, but also the misinformation campaign that has been used by certain actors in global politics today to shape domestic political environment in these countries. And I think for liberal, open, democratic societies, that's the most important threat, that you have countries which do not allow you access to their public places, public spaces, whereas they, through the use of their technology, are now able to penetrate your politics to an extent where they can undermine the very foundations of democracy. So I think when you're looking at these 4 democratic countries, that's where they want to take this challenge forward. And therefore, as a group of democracies, perhaps it's very important that they recognize this challenge and are able now to move forward in this discussion. So whether you're looking at it at the India-Japan bilateral conversation on this matter, that is very important and has been going on for some time. But bringing it together on a Quad level, at the level of the Quad, I think perhaps signifies the kind of challenge that perhaps a certain group of countries today face. And I think, let's be very honest about it, democracies do face this challenge, which is disproportionate to what, say, the authoritarian countries face, which is they don't allow you access. So therefore, there is no position there is no expectation that you would be able to do that in a way that perhaps they are able to undermine your own political institutions. And that's where the real crux of the matter for these countries lie. And you've seen certain discussions happening both in America and in Australia in particular about how intrusive some of these penetrations have been. And I'm sure India and Japan are equally cognizant of this reality, that this is not simply about technology, stealing of technology, development of technology. This is also much more diverse. This is much more significant in terms of where these democracies themselves stand. So I think this conversation is very important. This is happening at bilateral and trilateral level, as well as at the quadrilateral now. And perhaps this agenda will take, as these countries take forward this agenda in their various other conversations, they will be able to codify some norms of behavior that will help them in meeting out this challenge, which is simply not a challenge at the national level, but also a challenge at the multilateral and global level.
Absolutely. All right. Yes, Ambassador, I saw you putting up your hand there. You wanted to make a point. Go ahead.
Very brief point. India is particularly vulnerable for the simple reason that we are highly dependent on import of electronics. And whether it's computers or laptops or smartphones, we have more than 90 million Chinese smartphones in India. Now, each of the smartphone can become a weapon very easily. And they are in the hands of all and sundry. Similarly, the computer hardware and so on. So the embedded software can be a big risk. So for us, the struggle is even bigger because we not only have to deal with the cyber warfare, but also deal with the problem of hardware.
Absolutely. I think that's a very, very, very important and valid point that you raised. Let me take that up with Mr. Chaudhry now. Rahul Chaudhry, this issue of us importing electronics and the hardware coming in and the hardware being susceptible, how do we address that issue till that time we become a manufacturing hub, until we can take on that particular aspect? And also, I want to talk to you about another aspect that you spoke about in your opening remark as well. Let's take this up first, and then I'll ask you my follow-up question from your opening remark.
Okay. Very good question, and this is the crux of the matter. Because we now have vulnerabilities already built into our critical networks. And one of the most critical civil network is your power infrastructure. Telecom, yes, but power infrastructure is your most critical. And PGCIL and some of these power grid companies are the biggest issues which we could face. And if you see, we have unfortunately allowed Chinese companies to provide command and control into Northeast, into North. In fact, the tenders which went in, the Chinese company bid at material cost minus 10% to get those tenders. Now we have a situation where on war footing you have to take that out. You cannot have that kind of a critical infrastructure, railway signaling. You will have to just not talk about cyber at that control point. You will have to talk about where are the vulnerabilities which have come in. And I'm glad Ambassador hit the nail on the head. 90 million mobile phones are 90 million vulnerabilities in a network. From all of that point, the cyber war does not happen at the border. Cyber war happens in your hand. And that each vulnerability can be exploited, a path found, and it can multiply. Therefore, we now need a defensive mechanism by which we will. To me, I would rather not get a 5G into this country for next 3-4 years, 5 years maybe, but clean up the critical infrastructure first at the highest priority. I mean, we need to understand the kind of threats we are living with. And something where Japan has one major advantage. Japan was the first country which blocked the Chinese out. And therefore, there are enough infrastructure capabilities, etc., where we could come together. And one of the major advantages India has, which can be multiplied by the Chinese, most of these technologies require a lot of testing. Testing means a lot of manpower. Now, a manpower at $100,000 or $150,000 versus the $20,000 or a $30,000 an hour can create a win-win for both Japan, China, India. And for making that happen, what you require is a critical infrastructure which is secure. We need to create this critical infrastructure which is secure between at least Japan, India, Australia, and US, and create this capability. That would cost probably $1 billion, but that $1 billion is the R&D hub from where you could create the new technologies much faster. And India could play that critical role of providing the testing manpower.
Sure.
It's a win-win for all.
Points
testing
taken.
Manpower is the time which takes the huge. That is what just putting dollars is not gonna bring the time down. That is where the Chinese advantage also lies, because they have manpower, and that's also relatively cheap manpower.
Absolutely. All right. So a lot has been said. A lot has been said about critical infrastructure and critical information. Let's first categorize very quickly, Mr. Chaudhry, what can come under critical information and what is the infrastructure that is required to safeguard it?
Anything to do with next generation technologies, capabilities being developed in academia, in our, has to be the first, and also critical infrastructure, power, communication, and also obviously the armed forces, etc., are critical infrastructure that everybody recognizes. But you need to understand and traffic.
Okay.
Your traffic light controls and things like that. All of that can happen. And the last and the most critical part is the space part, which is your GPS.
Sure. Okay, points taken, and thank you for putting it out so simply for us. Yes, Ambassador, I saw you putting up your hand once again. Go ahead.
Very briefly, one of the things when you ask what should we do is to change a dreaded procedure called L1. And that is what is damaging the whole thing, because as Mr. Chaudhry said, and I have served in China, everything is subsidized. They are dumping stuff below cost, and nobody can beat them on L1. So what about national interest? What about security? What about quality? So we have to now make sure that security, integrity of the nation takes precedence over mere money, dollars and cents considerations. That L1 is passé. We cannot just allow that, period.
Okay. All right. So let me take the discussion forward now. Professor, as far as India and Japan are concerned, what is the level of cooperation as far as technology is concerned? How open is Japan to share cutting edge technology with India? And how can both countries benefit really as far as tech ties are concerned?
India-Japan tech ties have really taken off in the last decade or so, especially under Mr. Abe, where the idea was to make the relations more forward-looking. And technology was one area where, given Japan's inherent advantages and given the advantages that India gives in terms of economies of scale, the two can collaborate more and more. And I think this agreement in particular touches on something which is very fundamental. If you're looking at fourth industrial revolution, if you're looking at what is going to happen even post COVID-19, how countries, societies, economies are going to be dependent on cyberspace, that dependence makes all these societies extremely vulnerable. And as we were discussing earlier on, and that means that for these countries, for India and Japan, it becomes imperative that they start coordinating and collaborating more and more. And therefore, when you talk of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, when you talk of fourth industrial revolution technologies, emerging strategic technologies, this is one area where the two nations need to prioritize. And I'm glad that this is being done at this level now, because going forward, it is not simply a question of protecting yourself from a seeming adversary like China, but it is also about how do you develop indigenous capabilities that can, that allows you to reap the benefits of fourth industrial revolution, that allows you greater economic independence, which is the need of the hour. We talk of Atmanirbhar Bharat, we are talking of self-reliance. If you are not self-reliant in emerging technologies, then I'm afraid, all your data projections about your economic growth are going to bite the dust. So clearly, this has become very, very imperative for us to collaborate with like-minded countries. And Japan is one country where perhaps this collaboration is happening at a scale at this level. And we are trying to even think of this is a very serious indication of how dramatically evolved, changed our priorities have become. Because clearly a few years back, we were still having this discussion of, how to collaborate with China, how to do, whether China should be brought in and should be kept out, what are the areas. I think today there is a certain clarity in that discussion, not only because what is happening on the border, but also because what China has been doing to other countries, including countries like Australia and Japan. So I think there is a sense now that perhaps the need of the hour is to build relationships and capabilities in collaboration with countries like Japan. And this agreement actually lays the foundation for much more significant things to happen in the future as you look at greater technological cooperation, collaboration for the fourth industrial revolution. And I'm glad that economy will emerge as a heart of this conversation, because that's where actually most of the contestation would emerge over the next coming years.
Absolutely. Very rightly put. All right, time to get closing comments now from all my panelists with the best way forward. Starting first with you, Rahul Chaudhry.
What we need to do is create economic advantage for India in working with our partnerships in a win-win capability. What is good in India? If we think that somebody will give us technology, he's not going to give us technology unless and until you have something to give back. And what we have to give back is the immense technical manpower which we have, which can bring down the new technologies development cycle. It brings it down, and that is not going to be possible by just simply putting more dollars into those technologies. If we can leverage it, then we can move forward. But to do that, we have to create the trust level between us. And the trust level can come through a critical infrastructure which all the governments have full control on, right, and create that kind of a management. It is not about giving up our sovereignty. It is about creating a network where our IP creating capabilities are well recognized, sure, and we work with our best foot forward.
Absolutely. Ambassador.
we have already agreed that we have to create synergies with like-minded countries, but let me just concentrate on Japan, because while it is true that no country will give you cutting-edge technology, but in that framework, Japan has been pretty open about it. And of late, they have taken a strategic decision which has been conveyed to the business community, that engaging India is in a national interest. And I'm putting it in very simple terms, and the Japanese industry is government-led. So I think that that's a positive sign. And in terms of technology, we already have an India-Japan digital partnership, which was concluded in 2018. Japan has been developing industrial parks, industrial hubs. And recently there was a report which, if it fructifies, will be amazing, that there is a Japanese major company called Rakuten, which is planning a 5G network on a very revolutionary technology called RAN, Open Radio Access Network. And they are wanting to rope in or associate Indian technology companies, including HCL, Wipro, Mahindra, Sterlite Technologies. Now, here is an example of what we can do together. And I think when it comes to Japan, plus their ODA that they're providing us and the investments, I think it's a partnership that we need to continue to invest in big time.
Absolutely. And Professor, close the show for us with your quick concluding remark.
Well, India-Japan relations really have moved significantly over the last few years, and one has to look at Mr. Abe's contribution there. And I'm glad Suga-san is also taking this relationship forward in a direction that perhaps we had anticipated earlier. But I think that the real challenge for all the countries in the Indo-Pacific, in particular India and Japan, is how do you make sure that your critical sectors remain protected, and how do you make sure that you develop and collaborate the emerging technologies more as you go forward and as you look at the fourth industrial revolution. And I think as Japan looks at the technology sector through a strategic lens, India should also be doing that. And I'm glad that this agreement actually provides us a frame for taking this conversation forward in a very productive manner. And hopefully this will yield benefits to both the countries.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that cybersecurity cooperation assumes significance in present times as far as Japan and India are concerned, because both nations have been victims of cyber warfare. India is vulnerable on the cyber front. We have a strong defensive mechanism, but what we need to address and what we need to work on is an offensive capability. That's something that is lacking. There is a lot of convergence on issues of cybersecurity as far as the Quad is concerned. Like-minded countries need to come together to take on those who don't play by the rules. Identify vulnerable areas and sectors and address them on a war footing. India and Japan can take their ties or have taken their ties to new levels, and we can only see it being taken up a notch in the time to come. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.